when he's the one driving what motivates our heart, it will always have a bend of love to it. Not stinginess, not greediness, not a fearful, fretful pursuit of more. Psalm chapter 20 and verse 4 says this, may he, God, give you the desire of your heart and make all your plans succeed. May he do that. Psalm 37 and verse 4 says this, delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. You see, God says this, I want you to have an undivided heart, an undivided heart. It leads us to lasting success principle number 3. Principle number 1 was this, God works where you work. Number 2, God desires undivided worship. And lasting success principle number 3 is this, God expands our influence. Read this out loud with me. This is pretty loaded and it's going to shape a whole lot of context for what I'm talking about tonight. Starting in verse 7, it says, Exodus chapter 3, verse 7, the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. Now, let me set some context here. At the time that this is being written, Moses just comes into an encounter with God. All right. Now, how many of you know that before Moses had this encounter with God, 80 years before, there was a new Pharaoh who became the leader of Egypt. And that Pharaoh had a serious problem. You want to know what his problem was? There was a group of people who were a part of his country, and that group of people were called the Israelites. And the Israelites were getting too big for the Pharaoh of Egypt's comfort. So he didn't like how Israel was growing, so he decided to take the world into his own hands by stopping them from being able to grow. Here's how he did it. He said, I want to force labor on them that's so hard that the men, when they get home from working, they will not want to reproduce. Are you with me? After they go through this struggle and they're working real hard, he said, this isn't really working because the people started multiplying more and more and more. The nation of Israel was growing inside of Egypt. And he said, this isn't working. And so this isn't working, so here's what I want to do. I want to kill all of the newborn baby boys. And so at the time that Moses is born, he's born into a nation from the tribe of the Levites, the Levi tribe. And his mom and his dad were both Levites. He's born a Hebrew, an Israelite. He's born of the nation of Israel in Egypt. Are y'all with me? Everybody say yeah. All right, so he's born in Egypt, but he's a Hebrew born in Egypt. Y'all all know, you've seen the Prince of Egypt. They put him in a basket, he floated down the Nile River, a lady picked him up, brought him to the bank, and grew him up and raised him, nursed him in Pharaoh's household. For the first 40 years of Moses' life, he grew up and became the most educated of the people of Israel. He became the most talented. He was the most intellectually sharp. He was well trained in speech. He was a good orator. He was a good communicator. He was powerful in all the things he did. He was an amazing leader, but here's the deal. He had a divided heart. The division in his heart was that he loved the prosperity he had in Pharaoh's house, and then he also had a heart for these people who were being oppressed, the nation of Israel. He had a problem that the wealthy were actually squandering the poor, and that the wealthy were oppressing the poor. And so one day he saw this Hebrew man getting treated terribly by one of the Egyptian slave drivers. And one of these Egyptian slave drivers was being so difficultly terrible on this Hebrew that Moses came and tried to intervene. And in the process of intervening, he struck and killed the Egyptian. Well, that night he looked both to his right and he looked to his left. And he was really torn because he knew that if this news that he was defending the nation of Israel, the Hebrew people, so strongly that he killed an Egyptian, if this news reached the Pharaoh, then his future would be over. Torn the next day. I mean, it's one thing when you're actually protecting an employee from a boss. It's another thing when you show up the next day with a heart to protect the employees. And the next day, Moses, you know what he saw? He saw two Hebrews fighting against each other. He's torn. He's like, the nation of Israel's being oppressive on these people, and these people are in such bondage, they're actually fighting amongst each other. This is terrible. So he comes up and he tries to break up the fight. Anybody ever tried to break up a fight? Anybody tried to break up a fight and got in the middle of it yourself? Hold on, y'all back up. Whoa, you pushing me? I'm trying to break this thing up. I'm trying to help out here. When you try to help out, you also get a little dirty yourself. You know what I'm saying? You ever watched a football game and saw somebody try to break up a fight? Everybody starts fighting. Because once you start to try to break it up, you now become a part of the fight. And so what happens when he comes in, he tries to break up the fight. One of the guys smarts off to him and says, oh, what you going to do? You going to kill us like you did that Egyptian yesterday? And Moses is like, oh no. If the Hebrew people know about it, everybody knows about it. It's leaking among the ranks. I've got to leave. He left. He went to a city called Midian. When he got to Midian, he saw 7 girls drawing water. They were being oppressed. He had a heart to protect them, so he drew water for them. He ends up marrying a lady named Zipporah, whose father was a priest of the Midianites. And Moses spent the next 40 years as one of the most educated people in the nation of Israel and the most educated, talented scholars and mathematicians and all of these things in Egypt. And he spends the next 40 years following sheep. I mean, some of you animal lovers are like, what's wrong with that? Well, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, everybody got a cat, say meow. I mean, this is not a bad thing to love animals. Here's the deal. When you're the most educated person in the land, the most talented, the most scholarly, you know that there's more in store for you. If you spend 40 years tending to sheep, there's something inside of you that says there's got to be more to this life than living and dying and walking around with sheep, if you know there's more. Some people are like, they're like, listen, I'm fine tending sheep. I love tending sheep. I was made to tend sheep. I was made to be a shepherd. Some people were made for that. But Moses, I'm telling you right now that there was something inside of him that thought there's more. And here's what happened. The Lord showed up to him at this burning bush and he says, I've indeed seen the misery of my people Egypt. I've heard them crying because of the slave drivers and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them, thank you God, from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, a home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, termites. Then in verse 9, and now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. Finally, after 40 years, God, you're saying the cry of Israel has reached you. Moses had a problem with this 40 years ago. Have you ever started trying to fix something and then for 40 years, you're like, okay, God finally got on it? Like now he's going to, for 40 years, Moses, wait, so here's what God says to him. So now I'm going to send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. It's very critical that I tie this why, the motive here of why God expands Moses' influence and why God expands your influence. It's because there are people who are not experiencing the fullness of God's love in Egypt. There are people there who are being oppressed that have his heart. And God actually comes and he messes up Moses' life by calling him into a new occupation at 80 years old. Here's the deal. The solution for the problem that was going on in Egypt was Moses. Moses was the solution. Psalm 139, verse 13 through 14 says this, you created me, my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. You see, God designed you the way he designed you. He allowed you to go through the experiences that you've gone through in your life. He gave you your mom. Everybody say thank you. He gave you your dad. Everybody say thank you. He gave you your brothers and your sisters. Everybody say, what? He gave you your neighborhood. He gave you your childhood school. He gave you your first job. He gave you your life experiences. He gave you your talents. He gave you your intellect. He gave you your intellectual challenges. He gave you the love to read. He actually made you in a way that you don't like to read. He gave some of you a passion for mathematics, some of you a passion for health sciences, some of you a passion for all these things. Why? God did it. He knit you together. He wired you the way he wired you. Acts chapter 17 says this, Acts 17, verse 26 through 27. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. Why? God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any of us. Take a look at this slide. I want you to see this picture. In Jacksonville, Florida, Celebration Church, we are blessed with over 10,000 people who represent many spheres of influence. Here's what I want you to know. God wants to expand your sphere of influence. You're thinking, what is my sphere of influence? Your sphere of influence is a group of people or any person that you spend at least an hour with one time a week. But here's the problem. The problem in America is that the average father spends less than 7 minutes a week with his children. Most fathers, not just mothers, but most fathers, don't be condemned in this. I want to encourage you in this. There's a good news coming here. Most fathers spend less than 7 minutes with their children. So according to the statistic of what a sphere of influence is, your children, for some of us, aren't even in our sphere of influence because we don't spend enough time with them to actually influence them. God's going to change a lot of our hearts in this, I know. But here's the deal. Who do you spend time with at work? Who do you spend time with in your neighborhood? Who do you do recreation time with? Who do you spend time with in the ministry here at church? Where do you spend your time? As you look at this deal, some of you are actually in the media industry. You're telling stories. Some of you are in the health market. You're in the health industry. You're actually helping with counseling or helping with medical issues. Some of you are doctors and dentists and chiropractors and other fields that you have. Some of you are actually in the education field. You're teachers, you're counselors. Some of you are also in family. You're actually stay-at-home moms, or you're working in family development, or you're working in family or family education or home-based teaching. Some of you work for the government, law enforcement, or you're working in government in other ways, like keeping people's driving records clean for them, all right? Some of you are actually working in business where you're actually helping develop the economy. You're creating products. You're developing markets. You're actually increasing wealth. You're working in the banking industry, the financial districts of these things. And some of you are actually working in arts and entertainment. If you saw the video at the very beginning about celebration worship, we really are passionate about helping people find out where is your sphere, your area of influence. God designed you, He wired you, He made you, He created you to carry His love, not just to your area of influence. He wants to expand your area of influence. Everybody say why? So that His love can reach more people. God has you where you are so that you can demonstrate His love to more people. God cares about you. God gave you the ability to produce wealth. God gave you the abilities that you have. Here's why. He is crazy about people. Remember from Pastor Stovall's message last week about hot and cold? Remember that from Exodus, the other end of the Bible, Revelation chapter 3? You remember that? The city of Laodicea had so much talents and gifts and resources, and Jesus said, you're neither hot nor cold because you're not using what you have to be healing and refreshing to other people. Remember that? And remember when he went to 1 Kings chapter 10, and he talked about King Solomon? The Queen of Sheba came to his house, and here's what she said when she saw the temple. Because of God's love for Israel, He made you king. Here's what that means. God is so crazy about people, He gave you greater influence. God gave you more influence because He loves people so much, and He knows that if He gives you resources, if He gives you talents, if He gives you ability, you're not gonna follow the spirit of mammon. You're not gonna follow riches and possessions. You're gonna give Him the first fruits. You're gonna honor Him with what you have. You're gonna build what you have for His glory. You're gonna use your talents to reach people. God gave you influence, and He desires to expand your influence. Principle number 1, God works where you work. Principle number 2, God requires undivided worship. Principle number 3, God expands our influence. And lasting success principle number 4 is this: God is the source of lasting success. You see, success is not something that we accomplish in a day. It's not something we accomplish in a month. Success is not success unless it lasts. How many of y'all know somebody who's built an empire and it fell? I mean, just look at the University of Penn State right now. I know they won a big game yesterday, great. But have you ever seen a dynasty fall so fast because of one hidden error? Joe Paterno didn't report something, and people believed that he had a motive of hiding. And because of that one impure motive, his entire statue was brought down. His entire dynasty was brought down. They lost scholarships, lost money because of one error. One error. Now, underneath that error was a large, big mass of mistakes and hidden bad character flaws and terrible, sinful, bad character flaws happening there. But I want you to know this: success is not what happens in a day. Success is what happens beyond you. Success is what you're sowing your life into. Success is what actually lasts. And Jesus says this: the Father desires that you bear much fruit. He desires that we bear much fruit, fruit that lasts. Exodus chapter 3 and verse 13 says this: Moses said to God, suppose I do. Suppose that this really is God at this burning bush. And suppose you've really arrested me in my boring complaints out here in the desert, just walking around with sheep, wondering what